Okay. Good afternoon. I'm not Mike Ward, which the sign outside promises, and if you know Mike Ward, you've already figured that out because he resembles a lost member of the Rolling Stones, and I don't. I'm Joe Haas. I write for the Pink Sheet and the Pink Sheet Daily within Informa Business Intelligence. And we've got a really august panel, and I mean that here today, to discuss our topic, biomarkers and precision medicine. So I hope everyone's had a productive and eventful day so far here today at BioPharm America 2015, and that this session will offer a good conclusion to that day. And I just wanted to say that it's been my observation that the conference planners and the hotel staff have done a fabulous job. And I wanted to say thank you for that. This has been a terrific conference in many ways. The three panelists and I, we have some topics selected that we're just going to discuss in kind of a roundtable fashion. The audience is invited to ask questions whenever they want, but we also intend to leave some time at the end of the hour for questions from the audience as well. So use your best judgment there. And so I'll introduce the panel. They'll each tell you a little bit about what they bring to this issue, and then we'll just delve right into the topics. So sitting immediately to my right is Christine Grygon, Executive Director of Business Development and Licensing Prescription Medicines for Boehringer Ingelheim GmbH.
Thanks, Joe. As Joe said, my name is Chris Grygon. I'm with Boehringer Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals. I'm based here in Ridgefield, Connecticut, which is really just down the road from Boston, so not too far away at all. I have a background in science. I have a PhD in chemistry. I spent about 20 years in R&D before I moved over to business development. And after some experience in technology and oncology licensing, I now head up a companion diagnostics center, which is sort of a virtual think tank almost at Boehringer. And the purpose of that group is really to provide knowledge to the organization around companion diagnostics and personalized medicine issues, and harmonize our partnering strategy across the portfolio.
Also with us today, we have Ruth Phillips, Oncology Clinical Manager from IMS Health.
And I'm Ruth Phillips. I am an oncology nurse by trade. I've been an oncology nurse for over 20 years, and so my clinical experience kind of goes with me throughout all of the future efforts that I've been involved with. I spent a couple of years at a large pharma company in a clinical educator role, and most recently joined IMS to learn more about the data and how we can use data to better inform our patient outcomes and products that we choose for each patient.
And finally, we have Cecilia Schott, Head of Personalized Healthcare at AstraZeneca.
Hi, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here and share what we've been discussing a lot about personalized healthcare. So my background, since we're talking about background, I'm actually a clinical pharmacist by training, throughout in the healthcare field. Lived in Boston for 26 years and just started working out of Gaithersburg, Maryland. That's our new offices with AstraZeneca. What my team really does is the partnerships between AstraZeneca and diagnostic companies. And the way we look into those partnerships is to actually develop commercializable products, if that's even a word. But so I work a little bit early on with the translational science group in terms of once the biomarker has been identified and you have kind of a prototype assay. But the line of sight that I'm looking at is, can that assay, the prototype assay, become a diagnostic that will predict a patient response to one of our drugs in the portfolio? So we do the development piece. That being successful, we move into the commercialization piece, which spend enough time in this area and you get to do a few of those. So it's actually very exciting times, and I think we'll talk a lot about it, which is getting patients to actually use the drugs and getting physicians to actually look into the diagnostic tests.
Great. So I think we'll start off the conversation with kind of a general topic, and I'll just throw it out there and let you guys take it away. Where would you say we are in the process of bridging the gap between biomarkers and companion diagnostics? Don't all go at once.
I would say that, if you look at biomarkers and companion diagnostics, it's a very long road, and I think that it really depends a little bit on how the science has evolved and what therapeutic areas we're talking about. Certainly for oncology, I think things are advanced a little bit more. If you have a biomarker that's, the trick is really identifying the biomarker that is predictive, and Cecilia talked about this already in her introduction. If the biomarker is not predictive, you're not anywhere near a companion diagnostic. So the road is very, very long for therapy areas such as cardiovascular and CNS and other diseases where we just don't have as much of a genetic understanding as we do for tumor biology, say. And I think it's a little bit shorter for oncology. But I don't think we're very far down the path at all, especially when you think of the number of therapies out there and the number of diseases out there and the fact that we only have, 18 companion diagnostics? So I think we have a lot of ways to go.
So just to add to what Chris just said, I think if you look at least for AstraZeneca, when I first started in personalized healthcare, this was about 7 years ago, we had this strategy plan, and our goal for 2015, where we are now, is to get about 20% of our pipeline with embedded personalized healthcare strategy. We have now 80%. So 80% of our pipeline has a personalized healthcare strategy. Now, mind you that I'm using that word very broadly speaking, but it's really looking into biomarker and what the biomarker predicts. What does that biomarker do? So it's pretty much embedded into the drug development process. And so it is a long road. I think Chris is absolutely correct. But I think it's not part of the fabric of drug development in big pharma. It's not something that is, oh my God, are we going to narrow the population? Or are we going to, it's embedded in drug development.
Cecilia, can you speak to whether some of your competitors are that far along in terms of percentage of their pipeline having that integrated? Do you have any sense of it?
I don't know the numbers, but I don't think this is exclusive to AstraZeneca. I think this is part of drug development. I mean, if you don't do it, you can't develop drugs. It's very simple. Do you agree with that?
Yeah,
Yes,
I agree. And I think especially in oncology, if you're not thinking about it from day one, you have the potential to lose out. I think that's absolutely correct. It has become a critical part of the fabric of how we think about it. Whether or not we can get there is I would say a different question. But bringing all the questions to the forefront, at least at the start of a project, is certainly part of our mandate at BI as well.
I think to add one other point too is I think we're moving beyond oncology. So I got a member of my team that has done a lot of collaborations now in the inflammatory area. So I think that's another area looking to gout, lupus, respiratory diseases. So I think we're expanding to other therapeutic areas, which is very exciting.
Okay. So now, what can we say about the value of collaborations between drug makers and test makers? How has that changed? Has it changed?
I'm not going
So I think this is a tough question, and we've really spent a lot of time, the four of us, discussing this.
What the question should be.
What the question should be, and how is there value in that collaboration? And I think you can look at it from many different ways. If you have a product that can target a specific biomarker, you need a diagnostic companion. So there is value in that collaboration. How you get to that point can be challenging, and what the outcomes are can be challenging for some people. I think we're still learning a lot about that collaboration. There's still a lot of diagnostic tests that need to be developed that we don't have yet. So we're still in this learning phase. We're still in this growth phase at this point. So,
go on.
I was going to say, I think as with any partnership and any collaboration, what's inherent in the value proposition is what's the risk level, and just a couple of years ago, I think putting a companion diagnostic into the marketplace was a much more challenging endeavor than it is today. So if there's a path forward and a process by which you can get from point A to point B, and a lot of the pieces are in place, then the risk value proposition is very different than it is if that's not the case. So for instance, if you have identified a predictive biomarker and you have a mechanism for a test that can be approved by the FDA, it can follow the pathway that leads to a companion diagnostic, then that's a very different I would say, risk profile than, say, a new technology. Where we don't actually know how it's going to pan out and how it's going, what it's going to look like when it gets put through a rigorous clinical trial. So I think that, you know, there's still a range of partnerships and things that are happening, especially between pharma companies and diagnostic companies, and I think we're going to see that continue to evolve over the next few years.
So just to add, and I apologize, I thought I had my phone on mute, didn't. So just to build to that, I think depends how you also measure value, right? Yeah. So if you come from a diagnostic company that you have a platform and you're going to be adding to the menu of that platform, that's value into it, right? If you look into the pharma company into bringing the drug to the market, there's value into it. If you look into the patients getting access, there's value into it. So it all depends how you actually looking into what the value looks like, but also what the risks are. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm sure that I would be surprised if there's no questions from the audience on that topic, because that's kind of what we were discussing. You know, it's a very hot topic, how you define value and how do you get value. Now, I think for the diagnostic world it's quite challenging because once you hit the market, you have things like laboratory developed tests, which is a challenging environment to be, you know, and you have label, you have regulations of what you can say from a pharma perspective versus what you can say from a diagnostic perspective. So I think that also impacts how you measure value.
Okay. Anything from the audience at this point? Okay, we'll go on. So staying with that sort of topic, it's clear that in biopharma, some companies like Novartis and Roche have expressed a preference to keep their diagnostic work in-house. Can any of you speak to what are the comparative values of developing companion diagnostics in-house or through external collaboration?
I'll go first. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, I think it's a discussion that I'm sure every pharma company goes through, and I think it really depends a lot. Yeah, they're completely radically different business models. So to merge a diagnostics business with a pharmaceutical business is really difficult under the same roof, mm-hmm. and I think that's really the fundamental issue. And it's about what are your strengths, what is your core business, what are your capabilities, and then what are you going to look outside for. And so in the case of BI, we're not a diagnostics company. We don't feel that was something we were going to change our business model for. So we really certainly pursue diagnostic partnerships as part of our mandate when we need them.
Yeah, so from an AstraZeneca perspective, it's exactly the same approach. We're not a diagnostic company, and we've looked and we keep looking into what will it take. So when you compare with Roche, which clearly is the leader in the space, and they have access to multiple technologies, so they have a lot of flexibility. What we feel is that by being able to choose a different technology and technology providers, we have a lot of flexibility to access innovation. And I think it's the same approach that a lot of the pharma companies that don't have the diagnostic arm. Now, even within Roche, and we do have a long-standing relationship with Roche Diagnostics and all the different business units of Roche Diagnostics. Even Roche Pharma, it is a customer of the Roche Diagnostics, so they do have that customer relationship, although they do have that imperative. I would say the Novartis model is a little bit different because Novartis is not a diagnostic company. Right. Now, what we do have inside, we have a very strong translational science group and a personalized healthcare and biomarkers group. And what we do is, once we identify a biomarker, we do have some assays that we develop internally for exploratory purposes. So I usually joke around with the scientists, which they don't like it, that they have all their toys. They pick up all the different toys. So we do a little bit of the assay prototype development, so we get familiar with the technology. So when we have our partnerships, we know kind of where we are, so we can speak like as equal as you can get. From that perspective. So yeah, I think it serves well to have the flexibility to access innovation, unless you are, a Roche that has very robust diagnostic expertise.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think too that something that's of high value to us is partnerships where we can pilot new technologies and we can work with a potential partner to better understand what the new things are that are coming to the market. So I echo that as well.
And Cecilia, AstraZeneca has a long-term partnership in this area with Illumina, correct? And
Yeah, depends how you define long, but yes, yes.
and but other partnerships as well. Can you contrast that at all to how that working relationship, presumably it's multiple programs, multiple indications with Illumina, how does that compare or contrast to what Roche is doing or what Novartis is doing?
So, yeah, that's a really good question. So if you're looking to, I think to Chris's point, with Illumina is around, next generation sequencing. So it's about, panel of genes. So it's the holy grail of everything that we're looking for, right? You want to get a panel of genes, you want to get patient DNA, don't care which tissue it comes from. I mean, that's kind of your pie in the sky, right? So with the Illumina partnership, it's just not AstraZeneca. So I think that's kind of the change that we see into the space. It's AstraZeneca, Sanofi, and Janssen from J&J. And you're really looking to pre-competitive space. So you're looking to a list of genes and markers that we're all interested in, because at the end of the day, we're all looking to the same pathways, right? So, and we're developing this panel together, which is very different than, when you go to a single partnership. Even if you're looking to multiplex panels for, like PCR, even if you can do that, it's different than looking to an NGS kind of panel. So it's a very different approach. It's pre-competitive. It's a consortium approach. So it's a little bit different twist. And it's somewhat similar if you think about what Pfizer and now Novartis has with Thermo Fisher, with Life Technologies and the ion torrent. It's a very similar kind of approach when you're looking to these kind of panels.
Okay, thanks. Before we move on from this topic, I just wanted to ask the panel if any of you can provide examples of successes or failures in partnerships around biomarkers or companion diagnostics. I
can maybe point out two, and one of them might be a little bit unusual, but so we have a non-small cell lung cancer product on the market, Geotrif, which is an EGFR inhibitor, and it requires a companion diagnostic test. And we have a partnership with Qiagen, who developed the test for us, and that's been a very, very successful partnership. On a flip side, which I think is a little bit different, thinking about the commercial side of that and how you reach the right customer in order to make sure that that test and its corresponding drug are sort of enabled in the customer population. We partnered with patient advocacy groups to set up something called Let's Test, which is a patient education platform around understanding the value of what it means to get tested and why that's so important. And this is really an effort into patient education, which we have taken very seriously and are really, really proud of. So that's kind of a different partnership. It's not with a diagnostic company, but it's around something that I think is really important when you think about bringing personalized medicine to a patient. Is, you can get the technical things all in a row and everything lined up with the products, but really making sure that the end customer understands what the value is that they're getting, I think is really critical.
I think if you look at Pfizer as well, when they launched
Could you speak?
Sorry.
Yes.
I think when you look at Pfizer, when they launched Xalkori, they had partnered with AbbVie, and one of the challenges they had was who was actually going to market the diagnostic companion, and there was a distinct kind of rift between the two companies as to what each company was allowed to say about that diagnostic. Obviously, Xalkori had to have the diagnostic test completed before the patient could be prescribed the ALK, but Pfizer didn't want the reps at the time actually talking about the diagnostic companion. So then AbbVie had to go in and discuss kind of crazy. I know. I see you shaking your head. So, making sure that both companies collaborate well and are on the same page can be really important. And I think when you look at the launch of Xalkori, it really plays out that they didn't have a good collaboration, and they didn't really have a good strategy as to how they were going to get that message out to patients that they needed to be tested for ALK, or how they were even going to get physicians on board for testing. So that's an opposite example.
So I'll come from a different perspective. I always think that the diagnostic succeeds and what fails is the drug. That's kind of a different way of saying it. But it is true. I mean, the chances of the diagnostic succeeding and measuring what it's supposed to measure is 99%. The hypothesis on the drug and the pathway is what becomes very challenging. And when I say the drug fails, it doesn't mean the drug, it just doesn't work on the pathway that we thought it did. So can I give an example? I have several examples, unfortunately. But you learn, and you also learn how to put your agreements in place to account for that. So I think the consequences of that is that you try to de-risk. So talking about evolution of business models, your early investment into developing this prototype assay. So if we go back to the first collaboration we ever did in a companion diagnostic space, we were working with our partner in trying to put together this, what it was going to be this companion diagnostic in the phase 1 to phase 2, and it was like this absolutely perfect, met all the regulatory requirements and all the bells and whistles. And then the drug didn't make it. The efficacy wasn't there for that particular pathway. So I think we've learned that when it's early on, we don't make that much of an investment into developing it's a robust assay that meets regulatory requirements, but there's different investment levels that you make when you're developing that assay.
Okay, thanks. Before we move on to our next topic, does anyone have any questions or thoughts to add? Please.
Okay, I just wanted, I was going to sort of invite the panel to consider the example of Iressa, AstraZeneca's drug, which effectively was brought back onto the market with the advent of a test. And I wondered whether there's any work being done that they're aware of within their companies or in the industry where you might look at a marketed product which doesn't have a companion diagnostic with the thought that perhaps we ought to look at this because it might render its commercial obsolescence sooner or later. For example, if we can identify a responder group and run the studies to establish that, when given the nature of the industry. So looking at already commercialized products that might benefit from precision medicine subsequently.
So, I mean, I'll take the first one, then you can take it. So the answer is absolutely, and I think Iressa is a good example, but I think the way I would reflect to your question is different indications. So you can have, a same compound looking to the different indications, and you can make it, a predictive diagnostic they would use for that. I'm trying to think if there's one in the market right now. I don't think I can come up with one. But the answer to your question is yes, and do we consider it? Yes. And that's part of the life cycle management, not only of the drug, but also of the diagnostic. So one of the things that we're looking into is if you have a specific diagnostic they're looking to, I had a discussion early on, to a single mutation, can you actually look into a panel of genes and say a specific mutation in one tissue will be the same into another tissue? So can you do life cycle management of the test that would help predict the drug response into other areas? And the answer is yes, and we're very open to it. The challenge is, how much of it do you make in terms of an investment? And do you have the time to do it, and do you have the resources to do it? It's not inexpensive to develop targeted therapies. I think many years ago, I would participate in panels and say we're going to be saving money. I don't think it's true. I don't know if I want somebody to challenge me to that one. What we do is we are closer to ensuring success of the drug with a test, but we're definitely not saving money in the development. We're just decreasing the amount of failure. So in a way, you are saving money. But the development process, it's not inexpensive. I don't know, Chris, if you want to.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I don't think I have an example that comes to mind either. But I think that presumably, and I hope it's one of the things we look towards for the future when we have volumes of data that we can tap into and start to understand why there's been a failure or where that failure has come from. I think a lot of the things that are on the market now, we just don't have, we may not have the data packages to be able to go back and say, hey, what was right and what was wrong about the genetic sequence of a certain biology that could tell us, give us more information on why there was a failure. But I think there's, as you go forward and as we keep collecting data and more times, more and more often, we are setting up a clinical plan where we're thinking about what data do we want to collect, and in the event that we might need the data later on for such an evaluation. So I think it's in people's minds. People are definitely looking at it. We're definitely conscious of it. And I hope that maybe we'll see more and more of that going forward.
Well, and I think recently, bring this over. I think recently ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncologists, along with NCI and a number of large pharma companies, have partnered to look at basket clinical trials where they're looking across tumor types and specific targeted mutations that they can then maybe kind of collaborate and make that cost that you were talking about a little bit less for each of the pharma companies. But they're also looking at umbrella trials where then they take one particular tumor type and look across that tumor type to see if there's different mutations that maybe they can target in the future. So there's a lot of different novel things going on in oncology to try and help defray some of that cost and yet get the most patients possible with some treatment in that targeted therapy area.
Okay, moving on. One of our goals when we planned out this roundtable was we hope to offer guidance to smaller firms and startups on partnering with big pharma and larger, more established companies in biomarkers and precision medicine. I don't know if that speaks accurately to the expectations of a good portion of the audience, but hopefully it does. So the questions I want to throw out to each of you are, what do drug companies look for in a partner? What are the hallmarks of a successful collaboration? And what are the realistic or unrealistic expectations of such collaborations?
Let's start, right?
We're all going to talk anyway. So, usually I had my answer for this, but I'm going to change a little bit because it really depends what stage of the drug development program you're really looking at, right? So if you're looking to the IRS example that you just gave, you really need a partner that's able to distribute. You have a global footprint, partner that's able to distribute. You already have the tests in the market, right? So you have, Roche has one, QIAGEN has one. They're really good, and they work. And, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If it's a completely new area, you use the example from Pfizer, but if it's a completely new area that you really have a hypothesis, then becomes, is there a technology that would help you develop that test, and who has that? If it's a very innovative technology, the biggest challenge that I see from a BD perspective, and I'll be interested in my panel colleagues here, is what is the global footprint and access to that platform once the test hits the market? So that's the biggest question I always have. One of the things that we've learned, that's why I said I changed my answer, was early on I would say, well, we want global footprint, we want regulatory expertise, and we want a commercial distribution. If you look into the way we've launched olaparib in Lynparza, where is a laboratory-developed test, I shouldn't be saying that, should be PMA-approved laboratory test. In the U.S. with Myriad, that's our partner, it's changed how the distribution is because you now have central labs. And if you go to Europe, it's exactly the same model. We also learned by working with Myriad that not having the regulatory experience, it's not really a block because you do that together. So we did together with Myriad, going through the FDA, going through the process. So that can be overcome. The other example is the circulating DNA in Europe. That's now part of the IRESA label in Europe. Again, very different way. It's lifecycle management of the test and hadn't done before, and we did it. So it depends kind of where you are in the process of the drug. That's what you're looking for. So we have compounds in phase 1, and we can go out and explore different technologies. When you get into your phase 2, you want a partner that is committed. I think that's probably the one word that I have to come to mind, that is really committed into developing that test and bringing into the market, into patients, whatever that takes. I don't know, Chris, if you...
Yeah, I would echo all of those comments. I think they're right on. I think I would also say that when you, from a big pharma perspective, and at least how we think about it at BI, is a companion diagnostic is, we think of a companion diagnostic as the definition that the FDA has for companion diagnostic, which is a test that needs to be or that is required for the safe and efficacious use of a therapy. So therefore, I think when we're really looking for a partner to develop a companion diagnostic, the things that are really, really important to us are the regulatory experience, the commercial presence, everything that Cecilia said. But recognize that perhaps a novel technology or a new approach or a way to identify biomarkers is not necessarily going to lead you to a companion diagnostic. And so overselling something to say that yes, this can be used for a companion diagnostic is not necessarily the best approach, I would say. I think you have to be really open and honest about what you have and where your technology is, and what is the status of in terms of commercializing it and putting it forward. And that's really because we are looking for different things at different times, and I think it's great to really just have a true understanding of what the status of the development of the technology actually is.
I think from a data perspective, I obviously don't work for pharma, I work for the data company. But with the clinical background, and now IMS has a collaboration with Foundation Medicine. And so we can actually take the biomarkers that Foundation Medicine has and link that information with patient data. So we can look at the medical claims, we can look at the prescription, we can look at hospital data and EMR data and get a complete picture so that as you're developing your clinical trials, as you're doing your research and development, or maybe you're looking at a patient journey so you understand what happens to patients with different biomarkers, you have a better picture of what to take to a diagnostic company so that you can develop those products. So there's different levels of collaboration that need to be done.
And again, I'll throw it to the audience if the audience has any questions or comments on that topic. Okay. Another topic that we wanted to discuss this afternoon was the use of next-generation sequencing and how that can end up with different drugs or drug sponsors involved in treatment. That can raise a lot of issues. Why don't we start by discussing the issues around the drive for precision medicine and selecting patients for appropriate therapeutic regimens?
I guess I'll start from a clinical perspective. I think that's challenging. When you, and this is purely clinical, what I'm saying here, is when a patient comes in and they've had a full sequencing of their genome, things show up and we don't know today what to do with them. Is there truly a target that we can modify and have a successful outcome for that patient? Do we even have a therapy that's available? We have some today, but not many. I'll be honest with you. I think we discussed 18 targets, maybe. But there's a lot of mutations, and when patients come in, they want answers, and we don't have those answers, unfortunately. So there's a long way to go still in that precision medicine. I wish we had a perfect answer, and I think we were talking even earlier. It's always exciting to see what the future holds, and we want it now because that's what we want. We just aren't there yet.
We were looking at an article in the September 8th issue of the Journal of the American Medical Association, a couple of academics who, to quickly summarize their story, basically were saying precision medicine has overpromised and underdelivered. And I think what you're saying is, if you look at it right now, possibly, but that's not the final answer.
We don't know what the final answer will be.
Okay.
I think it's going to be a number of years until we're there. It's taken, gosh, when did they start the Human Genome Project?
1989?
89. I think that sounds about right. So let's call it 20 years just for nice round numbers. I'm a nurse. I like round numbers. Just think where, it's taken 20 years to get to today. How long will it take to get to that next point? When I was at ASCO in June, they did say that, we know that there's about 228 mutations that are actually causing cancer, and they've kind of weeded out those other genetic mutations that they don't believe are truly causative of cancer. So we've limited that number, but still, now what do we do with those targets? What do we do with those mutations? How do we act upon them? And what do they really mean? We know they cause cancer, but in what time frame? In which patient? What environmental factor do we have to have combined with that genetic mutation to actually have that cancer develop? So there's a lot of questions that are still out there. It's not, okay, we have 228 mutations, let's find targets for our products that target all of these mutations. I don't think it's quite that simple.
Well, cancer is so diverse. It's a whole bunch of indications under that one rubric.
Correct.
And I think there's even a school of thought today that every individual cancer patient, whether you're talking pancreatic cancer, breast cancer, they have their own individual disease. So actually, I think it sounds to me as a layperson that if we have it down to 228 genetic mutations, that's actually an incredible step forward, even though we don't know exactly what to do with it yet.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, we've made huge progress, but now we have to figure out how to manage that, and where do we go from here.
Okay. So moving on with this topic, between next-generation sequencing, companion diagnostics, and off-the-shelf tests, what differences do these options present for biopharmaceutical companies?
So again, I think we covered this a little bit, perhaps already when we talked about partnerships, and I think it depends a lot on where you are in the development process and what the needs are. So there could be, we look for partnerships and we look for collaborations. I would say all along the value chain. So a companion diagnostic again is a very specific beast, if you will, and it has a very specific development pathway, and so there are perhaps limited options associated with getting that done in a certain time frame. But I think there's a lot of options for other types of technologies depending on where you are in the development process. An early stage project may require biomarker identification. It may require tools to help identify specific biomarkers, and those are in a class of different types of partnerships. And there may be cases where you need, as far as a clinical, maybe for a particular clinical trial, there's lab-developed tests that are going to enable a particular clinical trial design. So I think they run the gamut.
I think the other point is when you think about NGS, when we come from a pharma perspective, we're looking to, okay, how do you take that, develop with the drug, get through the regulatory process, and commercialize it? If you step back and look into the academic centers, it's already been in use for many years. So if you look into the institutions like the Farber, Mass General, MD Anderson, Memorial Sloan Kettering, they all run, all these physicians, that's what they do. Yep. Patients go in and that's what they do. They have whole genome, they look at the next generation, they have huge databases. And that's what a lot of the innovation comes from, is from those academic centers. So by the time that they get to us, it's much more a narrow application or more an actionable application. So we're looking for, okay, what can you do with that information? How are you going to act on it? When looking to the academic centers, it's more of an exploratory. So that's at the other level of partnerships that you're working on, is with the academic centers identifying, these libraries that you have of information.
Okay. I'm going to apologize in advance for using a sports metaphor here, but I think this next question will actually be a nice batting practice pitch for Ruth, which is when next generation sequencing yields multiple markers for one patient suggesting various treatment options, how do you choose the right one? And I think we think that's a particularly prevalent issue now in oncology.
So that's a good question. How do you pick the right marker or the right target to go after? And I think the first thing you have to think of is if we have 18 products and 228 potential mutations, we only have a limited amount of targeted therapies currently available. So we're going to pick the therapy that we have a target for. So EGFR, ALK. And then if there's two, heaven help us, then we have to look at the patient and realize that each of these targeted therapies has their own side effects, their own adverse events. Patients can tolerate products differently. Is this IV? Is it oral? Is it something that they have access to financially as well as just in a geographic means? You know, when you think of patients that live, I call it out in the country, and they have limited ability to get to, say, an academic center, they may not have the ability to receive a targeted therapy at the same level that somebody that is closer to an academic center, just because maybe the community facility doesn't have the staff or the equipment needed to provide that targeted therapy. Plus, if you have to drive 100 miles to get to your closest community center, how often are you going to want to do that? So that's when you have to look at the patient.
Sure.
And really, when you're making decisions about genetic mutations and treatment, that's what it comes down to, is who's the patient, what do they look like, do you have a targeted therapy to begin with, and then go from there. So if there's two, you do the best you can, unfortunately.
Okay. And then NGS can yield significant amounts of data. We know that. But can this wealth of data be used to inform drug R&D?
Absolutely.
Okay.
From an IMS perspective, I think that's something that we feel very strongly about. That's why we pursued this collaboration with Foundation Medicine, so that we can take the data that we do have and link it to the various patient assets that we have, so that we can look at which biomarkers are of value, which length of therapy, duration of therapy. We can look at patient journeys. We can look at, is there a target for a particular product, or maybe a product that's in development that you can start beginning to kind of guide down that pathway. You can even look at physician targeting more from a marketing perspective. Are there physicians that are ordering more biomarkers? Our Oncology EMR has additional biomarkers, not just the Foundation Medicine, so we can pull all of that data and say, oh, Dr. Smith is ordering biomarkers on every patient. So maybe that's a doctor we want to target for, our particular targeted therapy, or maybe for a clinical trial collaboration, because we know that he's very involved in that area. So there's a lot that we can do from that perspective. And you're right, the data, it's amazing how much data is out there.
Chris or Cecilia, do you have a take on that question?
I guess what I was just thinking, what was just said, is also it enables you to, now we understand the development of resistance, right? So going to your example of, a TKI inhibitor, you now have resistance being developed. So it actually enables you to monitor. So if you really think of oncology becoming a chronic disease, that's what this will enable us to do, is just monitor patients, so the spectrum of time, longitudinal monitoring. So I think that's kind of where we're going.
Okay. We have two more topics that we outlined. We're actually coming up to the point in time that we were going to leave for audience questions. So I wanted to ask at this point, are there a fair amount of audience questions, or would you prefer that we, I guess I'm asking for a raise of hands, that we plow through and handle our last two topics in the time remaining to us, which is about 15 minutes. Please, we want this to be as interactive as possible. And could you tell us who you are and who you're with?
So my name is Robin Davison. I'm a sort of former biotech analyst and now a biotech investor from the UK. My question, I haven't really thought through the question fully, but it stems partly from a clinical anecdote which I received from a oncology KOL in the UK at an academic centre, was that I believe he had screened a patient for the ROS1 mutation, and this is in a, I mean, that's not approved for anything, but possibly it was colorectal cancer, but it doesn't really matter what it was because it's not approved, and had treated that patient with Xalkori, which has ROS1 activity as well as ALK, and I'd got a complete response, which I was very happy with, and it just occurred to me that you know, are we going down an avenue where you know, sort of, you don't really need regulatory approval either for the drug or the diagnostic? You know, does anyone have any observations on where the field is going if this sort of thing becomes more prevalent?
I think we're still going to need regulatory approval. I think that would be lovely. I don't know that we'll get away with that, though. I think that's one of the value that ASCO and NCI is trying to bring to the table using these umbrella studies and these basket studies, so that they can go to, say, the FDA or some other regulatory body and say, in these studies, we know that Xalkori impacts patients regardless of their tumor type, as long as they have a ROS1 tumor. And then it's not, maybe the label doesn't say the product is specific to lung cancer that's ALK positive or ROS1 positive, but maybe it says it's specific to the gene mutation. That's kind of where I personally see things going, is that our labels will be a bit broader and will cover more of the mutation than the specific tumors. Otherwise, you're going to have a long list of tumor types that could potentially be used for that targeted therapy.
Well, yeah, I mean, by only even from a pharmaceutical company perspective, but also from a patient perspective, really, the regulatory process is here to ensure that we have safety and efficacy. So the efficacy period is there, but it's about safety. You know, you want to make sure that whatever we're taking and giving to our families, it's safe. So that's one important thing. I think it's still there. The initiative that the one you describe is kind of what we all work together. I mean, there's investigator-initiated trials. There's all different venues and mechanisms to use this kind of knowledge and experience, which is no N of one for your description, and expand drug labels. But you still need to have the patient safety, you know, at the heart of the drug development process. I mean, as a patient, that's what I want. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know.
I can't say it any better than that.
I'll throw it out to the rest of the room. Does anybody else have questions? Or please, we'll get you the microphone. And again, if you'd mind telling us who you are and who you're with.
So my name is Marcel Weiner, and I'm CEO of Disease Zone, which is a company which we're spinning out from Harvard's Channing Division of Network Medicine. And we are focusing on network simulation of molecular interactions. And related to your comment on immense data, my question is: do you see a trend of integration of different silos, data silos within your organization? Because our clients are actually struggling to combine the molecular level information with the clinical information, and this is what we are actually doing, molecular level simulation plus overlaying the gene expression data sets. But usually there is no real collaboration between these departments. How do you see this trend in these organizations?
I definitely think it's increasing. I think it's a very important future for big pharma and little pharma and everybody in between, if you don't have that linked ability to look at the whole patient, it's very easy to miss a part of the picture. And so that's actually, they brought me into IMS to focus on that specific initiative and to make sure that we have all the pieces of the patient picture so that we can understand what that patient journey is, both prior to developing a cancer as well as after they start treatment. And do they respond well based on different genomics or different treatments that they receive, and how long does that treatment last? And are there things that can be done at different points in a patient's journey that can maybe keep a patient on treatment longer? Because obviously if you're on a particular treatment, that benefits pharma for longer periods of time, instead of maybe a short course and then having to switch to another product. So there's lots of things that we can look at, and I think it's phenomenal, because I just, for me, understanding the whole patient is how we're going to move forward in curing cancer. And I think, to your point, I can remember a Harvard physician coming into Fox Chase, where I grew up, and saying that the goal back many years ago was to make cancer a chronic condition. And I think we're almost there. We're getting there. So now we need to take it that next step. And we're not going to be able to do it unless we see that whole picture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, with the time we have left to us, I thought, if none of you object, maybe we'll just move to that last topic, which was about basket and umbrella trials. Mm-hmm. And specifically, how can basket and umbrella trials be used to help with partnering, finding combination of drugs to serve a specific need?
Okay. Well, I think you have to partner in those situations, because if you look at, especially if you look at the umbrella trials where you're looking at multiple tumor types, one tumor type with multiple gene mutations, you're going to need different targeted therapies, and not one company is going to be able to have all of those targeted therapies. So you have to partner to be able to get that accomplished. How easy is it? I don't know that that's... Fortunately, I do think that there are some companies, that maybe see the investment in partnering as a positive. But it's challenging because, again, there's that risk. What happens if somebody else's product works better, or there's lots of risk. And who's willing to take that risk?
So I'll give my perspective from the AstraZeneca point of view, and then I'll pass on to Chris. So I think it's one of the things that it's a huge opportunity to actually share, the cost of clinical trial development. Mm-hmm. So it's just a fantastic opportunity. It's a good problem to have when you have a robust pipeline that you can contribute compounds into a basket trial, which we have. It also helps you expand, there's so many trials that we can do internally. There's so much we can develop internally by ourselves. So it gives that opportunity to actually do combinations, as you said. And it's all in the collaboration, and I think we're going to see more and more of that, because which we're not probably going to address, but if you look into the immuno-oncology space, and there was some discussion earlier this morning, it's going to be all about combinations in immuno-oncology. And the way to test the hypothesis is this kind of trials. It's going to be, because otherwise it becomes such a complex and investment-intense process that you're not going to be able to leverage the wealth of information and the wealth of a potential of a drug. So I think it's there. The experience with the basket trials is the pharma really comes together. It's actually fascinating how the pharma companies do collaborate. We can do better. Of course we can do better. You know, I mean, we were just talking early on, and I think it's a process that we see it's going to be evolving with time, but we are collaborating because it's the way to get the drug to the market. I don't know, Chris.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest trends of the future. It is clear that for a lot of oncology therapy is going to require combinations of drugs, and I think that we all recognize that, and you know, working through how those partnerships need to evolve and how those partnerships need to work is definitely a big challenge, and is definitely something that's really at the forefront of our thinking as well.
And lastly, we'll wrap this up. I think this is a good question, although I do think, Cecilia, you already addressed it a little bit in your response to the last question. For biopharmaceutical companies, what are the advantages or disadvantages to participating in basket or umbrella trials run by ASCO or the National Cancer Institute compared to the potential advantages or disadvantages of running those trials themselves?
Well, I think, yes, Cecilia did hit on one of the points about the development costs, and I mean, it really is. I think gone are the days where you know, you could, as a pharma company, invest in every clinical trial you could think of around a therapy, and I think that's hard for oncology because the potential breadth and depth of a treatment is difficult to comprehend sometimes, and I think that when you have to make an investment in a lot of different types of cancers, a lot of different therapy areas, a lot of different stages of cancer, whatever clinical trials you can think of, I think the investment becomes really nearly impossible to do. And I think going forward, as we think about cost control measures and things associated, especially with pharmaceutical development, then that just becomes a burden that's really, really difficult for any company to take.
Yeah, I think you summed it up nicely.
Wonderful. So thank you, panel. Very informative. I'd like to congratulate the audience. It's the end of the day, the end of a long conference day. I think you all hung in admirably. So thanks very much. Unfortunately, there's not a Bruins game down at the Garden tonight, so maybe we'll see all of you at the block party over in Cambridge. But that concludes your conference day, and enjoy the rest of the conference and have a great evening. Thanks.